I was aware that nobody had ever really talked to me about motherhood, and that I was encountering huge questioning of how women could be fully realized ourselves as human social beings, how we could be independent, how we could have our autonomy, and how we could have children. And where was the fit? Was there a fit? Mm-hmm. And a recognition that mothers were not valued in our society.
Hello and welcome to the Empowered Woman podcast with me, Kieran Everin. This week I'm joined by former academic and head of women's studies at UCD, feminist and LGBTQ plus activist Ailbhe Smyth. In this life-affirming conversation, Ailbhe reflects on never having heard the word matrescence and what it means to her. She talks honestly and openly about motherhood and explains the complexities of mothering in a patriarchal society. Ailbhe, thank you for joining me on my podcast, The Empowered Woman. I want to start off first by asking you about matrescence, because I know you mentioned when we spoke before that you had never heard of the word. What does the word mean to you, and were you surprised you'd never heard it before?
Well, I was surprised I'd never heard of it before, because I was a bit annoyed that I hadn't heard of it before, because, you know, at my stage in life, I like to think I know everything. And of course, like everybody else, I absolutely don't. So I was a bit surprised, though, because, being a mother, motherhood, mothering, all of that has very much been something that I have thought about all my now rather long life as a feminist. So I was very surprised I hadn't actually come across it. And what I thought was really interesting, Kira, was, why am I hearing it now? Because I always think that these are not entirely accidental things, and that there are very good reasons why that word, which when I actually looked it up, was in fact first introduced as a neologism, as a made-up word, back in 1973 by a woman who was, what was her first name? Raphael. Dana Raphael. She was,
yes.
I think, an anthropologist.
Yes.
And, she was a scientist, and she based it on adolescence. And it was doubly interesting because I had been thinking about adolescence before you called me in the context of another word, which I know very well, but which is never used, which is senescence.
Okay.
Older age, growing old. So adolescence, that teenage developmental period. Matrescence, that developmental period of becoming and learning indeed and existing as a mother, which I would have to say never stops, but it is there as a developmental period. And then senescence, which is that process of growing old. And since I'll be 80 at the end of the month, I thought it was really, I had been thinking about that and thinking how we don't use that word at all. There are things that people don't really like talking about in our culture. Absolute growing old is absolutely one of them. And in a very strange way, I think taking being a mother seriously is not really talked about all that much when I think about it. And we can talk more about that now. So it's been very interesting since we spoke last, my thinking about this and reflecting on my own feelings as much as knowledge and understanding. I sort of always hope that the two come together somewhere.
Yeah.
But they might not. It may just be, there may be quite a lot of unsorted out emotion there as well.
Yeah, this is it. When we spoke on the phone, and you said when you became a mother, you said you knew you were going through something, but that you didn't have the language for it. So how did you, I suppose, make sense of it, move through it, or process it?
Yes. Well, first of all, maybe I should say that I was 29 going on 30, that I was in an unconventional situation for Ireland at the time. in that I had been married really very briefly several years before, just for 6 months, and then had decided to have a baby with another man who didn't actually live here. And all of that was considered very, very unusual. So I think I was clearly having to deal with quite a lot of questioning from people around me. Things like, are you going to keep the baby? And saying, well, no, actually, this is your chosen baby. And that was in 1977 when, I was becoming and much more familiar with the ideas of feminism, which had started to come up at the beginning of the 1970s. And I was aware that nobody had ever really talked to me about motherhood, and that I was encountering huge questioning of how women could be fully realized ourselves as human social beings, how we could be independent, how we could have our autonomy, and how we could have children. And where was the fit? Was there a fit? And a recognition that mothers were not valued in our society. So all of that was coming up during the 1970s in ways that were very important. So I suppose because I was an academic for all my working life, well, my paid working life, I still work, but just not paid anymore. I had always turned to reading, who's writing about this? What are people saying? And a book which influenced me very much was Of Woman Born by Adrienne Rich, who's a most wonderful, superb poet, and whom I had the great privilege and honour of meeting when she came here to Ireland. But she had just written this absolutely wonderful book about motherhood. As she basically said, look, the thing about motherhood that we have to understand as feminists is that it's an institution, but it is also, so it's an institution which is governed by all the kinds of power structures that we associate, I'm thinking back now to the 1970s, with patriarchy, and which devalues women and so on and so forth. But, she said, it is also an incredibly important experience. So there was no sense in which Adrienne Rich, who was a wonderful feminist, there was no sense that she was going to throw any babies out with the bathwater. She was trying to see how did we negotiate? How did we navigate? How did we challenge that separation of experience and institution? And what did we need to challenge about the institution of motherhood? And I would have to say that that book was incredibly important to me. And in fact, when my daughter was born in 1977, and I was in the hospital with midwives and with one midwife who was telling me, your baby's not going to be born, it's too early. And I said, yes, it is. The usual tug of, well, a not untypical tug of war, I think.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I'm encountering somebody who's trying to, for the best possible reasons, trying to control me in this situation. And the funny thing is, I absolutely do not want to be controlled.
Yeah.
I could feel that kind of, I would hesitate to call it instinct. I just did not want to be held down. I did not want to be controlled. And it was actually a cesarean birth in the end. So, but that in itself, I was actually reading Adrienne Rich's book and thinking, I am actually physically and socially encountering the institution at the hospital, which then kept me separated from my baby after the birth. And all kinds of things that made sense. And that stayed with me, and that really grounded my own thinking about motherhood. And it was hugely helpful, not in a very practical, everyday sense of knowing what to do, but in how I could think and feel my way through what was a huge step, and which is still, I think, a huge step for not necessarily every single woman. We're not all the same. We're all very
Mm.
different, but
Mhm.
which can be such a huge step that you have an image, an identity, a sense of yourself, a sense of your life, even a sense of your future. And suddenly, or not so suddenly, whatever, why would it be suddenly? It wouldn't necessarily be that at all. You find yourself thinking, it's not so much that you think I'd like to be a mother, it's you think I'd like to have children. I'd like to have a baby. And that in itself is really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because we don't think about being a mother, we think about having children.
that's
Maybe
it.
there are women out there who do think about, I'd like to become a mother. So my apologies to them. And I shouldn't ever generalize, but I have that sense that, my own friends and contemporaries, my daughter's friends and contemporaries, my daughter, people say things, men say it. It's time for us now to start a family, to have
Mhm.
children, not to become a father, to become a
Yeah.
mother. Maybe that follows later,
Mhm.
but we don't really, I mean, I suppose the most obvious training you do for becoming a mother is taking folic acid, folic, whatever it's called, to
Folic acid,
strengthen your,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, folic acid, isn't it? Which we didn't have, by the way, in my time. But it, y- we don't really train for it. And yet, when
No.
you think about it, the way we bring up children when they're approaching puberty and adolescence, as parents and your children, I think you have.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yes, probably
yeah,
not old enough, but I mean, you sort of begin preparing them.
yeah,
Probably not terribly well, I have to say, because adults understand nothing about contemporary adolescence, I think. And maybe
yeah,
that's not a bad thing either. But you have it in your head as a parent that adolescence is an really important stage in
yeah,
my child's life. And I need to put certain safeguards in place. I need to maybe think about it, maybe even take some advice. I need to keep an eye on him or her. I need to maybe try and talk to them, which is terribly difficult. My best advice always was put them in the back of the car and drive, and you can say anything you like and they listen for
yeah.
some odd reason. But, there is that doesn't happen to anything like, or it didn't in my day. Maybe it's changed now. But you just suddenly sort of said, "Oh, right, okay. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a baby?"
Yeah,
And I was very lucky, got pregnant immediately. And like a lot of women, there was no preparatory
no.
phase. There was no preparation. There were the 9 months of the pregnancy. Well, in fact, in my case, it was a bit, bit less. Um, and you just went into it almost blindfolded because nobody
Yeah,
talked to you about that. In school, I was with I was at a wonderful school, actually, Our Lady's School in Temple Oak. And the nuns were English. They'd come over from England and they didn't understand anything about Ireland. I was just very lucky to end up there. And they decided that we should understand something about how to behave socially. It was very middle class, but it was good. And that we needed to know something about sex. But of course, they never used that word or anything.
no, no.
So they invited somebody in. In fact, Angela McNamara was the first school she ever um, spoke to was our school. But she even didn't talk about sex. And she didn't talk about having a family. We didn't know how you would ever have a family.
Yeah,
I mean, we didn't know how babies were made. So
yeah.
so there was no way that we knew how to be mothers.
No, there's no
And our
preparing for that
parents,
becoming part.
no, and our parents were too shy.
Yeah.
Most Irish parents were either just didn't know how to talk about these things or were far too shy to talk
Mhm.
about them or
Yeah,
thought it was immoral or something,
yeah, yeah.
So
And
it comes later. It's afterwards in a way. It was much later on I realized, oh my God, I should have been in training for this for several years. I should have been sleeping a lot,
yeah,
reading a lot, thinking a lot. learning how to play games,
Yeah. Yeah, I
learning how to
know.
manage, how to cook
How to
sort
cook.
of food that babies like and
Mhm.
not give them eggs at 2 months old and have them projecting things all over the place and so on. Yeah. There were all kinds of training, but the point, my point, I mean, we can be kind of funny about it, but actually the point is that it's not all that funny, as you well
No.
know, when you're there in the middle of it.
Yeah. It's very hard and it's very challenging. And you mentioned that the value that we place on mothers, on motherhood. And it's really interesting when we talk about motherhood, and you mentioned it yourself there, motherhood as a construct in within a patriarchal system. Um, why don't we value mothers? I mean, I know the answer to that is very obvious, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, but I think it is very obvious. I mean, we do still live in a world which, whether you use the word patriarchy or not, is still very dominated by
Hmm.
men in terms of power and control.
Yeah.
And while it is certainly true that wealthy men have most power and most control, all men have access to, on the whole, more power than all women,
Hmm.
if you sort of add it all up. And we only have to look really sadly and tragically at the figures in relation to men's violence against women, which we now
Yeah.
are much more likely, for very good reason, perhaps to call gender-based violence, but which is very typically men's violence against
Hmm.
women. And men have that power, which they exercise on a regular basis. So there's economic power, there is
Yeah.
that political power,
Hmm.
and there is that power of violence and brutality. And all those forms of power are wielded by men, and they possess more of each of those forms of power than do women. So it's actually very difficult. And that's fundamentally, I think that's kind of feminism. It's almost like baby talk feminism in a
Yeah.
way that I think we all understand that very well, that
Mm.
of course we have to fight to gain power politically, if you like. We have to fight to gain power economically.
Yeah.
We have to fight to end violence against women. But all of those factors together are in themselves extremely powerful. It's an incredible structure. It's a whole edifice that keeps that makes gender a determinant of your place in the social structure, in the power structure. So men have power, women do not, and it is
Hmm.
gender that actually does that. But the interesting thing, of course, is that gender means far more for women than it does for men.
Yeah.
There are other factors, there's ethnicity and the social class, disability, all kinds of things. But gender cuts across all of those,
Hmm.
and it intersects with all of those, and it creates, it multiplies and amplifies the problems across them. But gender is there as a baseline. And, I've been saying quite a lot recently that we need to be really careful and to recognize that men don't have gender. They just are.
Yeah.
Women have gender. That's what we have to fight there. So that's why it's very hard for us to move that devalorization of women. And why that is there is because we have an imbalance of power. Men have more, women have less. And everything that women do and have historically done, and also naturally in terms of our physiology, our
Yeah.
biology, everything like reproducing, is not given value because men are the only ones who possess power and value and so on and so forth. So, you know, we have to be very clear to say that men produce, women reproduce, but women can also produce,
Yeah.
and that reproduction is an incredibly reproduction is fundamentally crucial and vital
Yeah.
to the human race. There's nothing without it, and men participate in that
Hmm.
actually.
And came
Um,
from that.
Yes, and also need to participate in the economy of reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
So I am, 100% committed to arguing always for equal parenting roles,
Mm-hmm.
which is not to devalue women's physical and emotional role in mothering, not at all, but which is to say that there must be joint responsibility.
Yeah.
Just as, I believe that it's important for women to be able to make choices
Yeah.
about how they mother, how they parent,
Yeah.
um, and that hopefully they would be doing this with their partners. And of
Yeah.
course, many people now are in same-sex relationships, there would be two women or two
Yeah.
men, will be parenting together and
Yeah.
working out those new and somewhat different roles.
Mm-hmm.
But it does make it very, very complicated because productive power is important, certainly. Reproductive power, it's it's a power which stays behind the scenes, which stays off the public stage, which is not in the public arena.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is why, there are still so many difficulties for us as women in employment when we're pregnant. I mean, we certainly could not say, despite changes that have occurred over the past 30 to 40 years, we still couldn't say that we've got the right kind of playing field there for
No.
ourselves as women.
No.
Far from it,
Yeah.
we're still fighting over
Mm-hmm.
adequate leave,
Yeah.
parental leave. We're still, that notion of parental leave is not everywhere embedded. In fact, very far from it, because even where you have it in some of the Nordic countries, and I think probably all of the Nordic countries actually, and increasingly here elsewhere in Europe, men don't take that leave, or they tend to
No.
take much less than women do because they're earning more than
Mm-hmm.
women. So, they can't go back to the 3/4 salary or whatever it is. So there are still these huge, 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 huge difficulties. Women are
Yeah.
still losing their jobs when they get pregnant. It's not admitted. It's against the law. It's completely illegal, but it happens regularly. I know women to whom this has happened and they have been powerless to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a, that lack of respect and
Yeah.
understanding. And it's also true we live in a capitalist world where profit is much more important than children,
Yeah.
or profit is more important than parenting.
Yeah.
If you have two peas, profit is going to win all the time. So men stay in the jobs, women go back and have the kids and are supposed to get on with it. And that then tends to give rise, I think, very often to arguments between women,
Mm-hmm.
which are, to my mind, in a way, they're not pointless because I understand the point of these arguments, but they don't help us. Where, one woman will say, well, I really value my role, my job, if
Yeah.
you like, my role as a mother. I want to do it absolutely as fully and wonderfully as I can. Therefore, I am not going to work for money. I'm not going to do paid work when I'm raising my child or children. And other women will say, well, look, actually, I would just be annihilated if I didn't get out to work every day
Yeah.
because that's a really important part of who I am, my identity. And I feel it actually helps me be a better parent
Mm-hmm.
or not, as the case may be. I mean, it's always very difficult, but that's something. And I think to myself, actually, it shouldn't be like, it shouldn't have to
No.
be like that.
Shouldn't be too
It
competing.
absolutely should not have to be like that. And we should not be pitting ourselves against one another. If I want to stay at home and raise my kids, that's fine.
Yeah.
The only time I'll have an argument with somebody is if they want to stay at home and be obsequious and subservient and wear floaty dresses and little high heels when they're doing their mothering, which is not entirely appropriate either, and be trad wives. No, of course not. Of course I
Yeah.
don't want women to be uh, annihilated in their
Yeah.
personhood because they're mothers. I want all of us as women to be able to be mothers or not as we
Mm-hmm.
choose. I
Yeah.
think that's okay. Of
Yeah.
course it's all right. Men can choose. In
Yeah.
fact, men often choose not to be fathers even when they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
That's
run
it.
off.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Women don't, on the whole, do that. It
Yeah.
happens, but not so much.
Yeah.
So, all of those imbalances are there. And anything, thinking that helps us to understand what becoming a mother involves, if you like, is, I think, really, really, really interesting and
Mm.
helpful and important. And we do need to absolutely think about that. Not to put some sort of straitjacket on women and say, you must be a mother and you must be a mother in
No.
in this particular way. No, it's not about that. It's about being able to think about it and being able to appreciate it. And, in a way, I would quite like there to be something called matrescence as well,
Yes.
because why wouldn't fathers learn to
Yeah.
become the, the majority of fathers in my day? And I know I sound like a complete owl one when I say that,
No,
but
no, no.
a long time ago, they hadn't a clue. They
No,
didn't think they had to be fathers. I mean,
no.
my father, who was, a good person, good man and kind person, he didn't do anything. He would bring us for drives.
Yeah.
Um, and in fact, sometimes he would go in and meet his friends in a pub, with the result that I always think that the memoir I write, if ever I do write one, will be called Pubs I Have Had Lemonade Outside of, because that's what fathers did.
Yeah.
They were, you know, our mother got a rest on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And of course, in those days, drink driving and so, well, they were different times. And I
No.
absolutely never want to go back to them, by the way. Never, ever, ever. They were not good for anybody. But fathers need to learn how to become fathers,
Yeah.
because mothers do. We have to kind of teach ourselves and learn
Hmm.
from each other, but also to appreciate.
Yeah.
And I think maybe young men now are more aware of that and are
I
more
think so.
involved, more
Yeah.
engaged. I see it with my own daughter and her partner, and, they're really great. They're both very, very engaged parents. But there is still something that more, if I put it this way, I hope people listening won't have, yeah, well, why would they have a conniption? More is expected of mothers than of fathers,
Oh, yeah. 100%. Yes.
isn't it?
Unfortunately. Yeah.
We are the emotional mainstay.
Yeah.
We are the practical mainstay. We are
Hmm.
the whatever, whatever. So that's why I think it's really good for us as women to think through motherhood as being a developmental process, that,
Yes.
this is not something which just drops down out of the sky or something, and that
No.
there is a lot to be understood and learned and
Yeah.
appreciated
Hmm.
in that.
Yeah. And it's something that we develop through, that we don't just know or doesn't just come naturally to us, and that we're not
Yes,
doing
that's
wrong.
very important.
Yes.
That's actually curious. You're so right about that, because people would say, oh, well, of course, I mean, because I can remember saying, well, I don't think I'll be a very good mother, because I was coming up to 30. I was like insofar as at that time you could have a career, I was there
Mhm.
with my career, and I was thinking, oh my God, I have the clue. I'm going to be really bad. And people said, not at all, it'll come, women were saying to me, it'll
Yeah.
come naturally
Come
to you.
naturally.
And I was thinking, no, it won't. Nothing else has ever come naturally to me. Why would that? Why would that come naturally to me? And
Yeah.
it didn't. It
No.
didn't. I mean, I did not know. Of course, I, I knew, I mean, I knew how to love my baby. I knew how
Yeah.
to love my child, but I knew how to love people anyway. Not very
Hmm.
well, by the way. I could have always done it a lot better, but, you know, that, yes, but anything else, no, I mean, I had to learn how to do
Yeah.
things. And I also had to learn how to deal with myself,
Yes.
when I would get, and this is something that I know that, is part of thinking about matrescence, that acknowledgement that it can be very ambivalent for women as well, that we are very pleased on the one hand, maybe to have given birth, to have a child, but we are also anxious, concerned, not just about how we actually do the
Mhm.
job of mothering, but what part of us will be lost or what part of us will be hidden, what part of us will have to go underground for a long time. And in a way, there is part of you that kind of sort of does go a bit underground. Not
Yeah.
maybe for everybody, of course, but I,
Mhm.
I think there is a bit, but it can also resurface later. But I often think, don't know why, particularly of women who are artists of one kind or another, writers, artists, dancers, maybe even actors and so on, that creative part of ourselves as human beings. I think, because I'm not that person, I'm not an artist, I think it must be quite difficult to get that to sit easily with mothering. And I'm always very curious and interested to know how women who are artists and writers and dancers and choreographers and
Mm.
opera singers, because they're wonderful and they're wonderful, they have children. And I think, oh my goodness, that must be an altogether different sort of experience. That there are so many experiences of being a mother as well,
Yeah.
of not losing sight of the person that you are while recognizing that you're also adding to that person.
Yeah.
You're developing, just as
Yeah.
you do in adolescence, you develop.
That's it.
And in adolescence, you make lots of mistakes
Yeah.
and you do very bold and wild things and go out of control. You're not allowed to do that, I think, as you grow older as a mother. You were supposed to be very wise and so on. I
Yeah.
actually we have to be allowed to make our mistakes and find our way
That's
as
it.
well.
Yes. That's 100% I agree. It is. It's about finding our way and finding our own way, not, oh, she's doing it that way, so that's how you do it, and not trying to live up to that construct of the perfect mother who's always happy, self sacrificing, ever grateful in this, so called blissful
Yes.
state, which isn't real.
Yes,
That's
well,
not
I mean, we're
real.
terrified of being judged as being bad
Yes.
mothers
Yeah.
because, there are a couple of things that women never want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those two things is a bad
A
mother,
bad
or we
mother.
don't want to be
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
publicly as a bad mother. Um, and I won't even go to the other place, but we, there is a fear of being judged. And actually, you kind of have to take your courage in your hands, don't you?
Yeah,
And
you do.
just do it and
Yeah.
say, that's the way I
Effing.
do it. But that's
Yeah.
also, I think, about having an understanding of what it is
Yeah.
that it's not instinctive, that we can actually acquire the skills and learn it and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that teaching actually comes from observation and from what's in ourselves and from learning on the job.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is true. I just want to go back a little bit to the
Mhm.
70s. So when the marriage ban was lifted in Ireland and women were back in the workplace again. Um, and we went back into the workplace, and rightly so. But we also had children at home and we were running households, and the load wasn't split fairly.
No.
Um, but we were told we could have it all, do it all, be it all. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was one of those women. I always remember my lovely daughter, when she was quite small, saying to me one day after I'd collected her from school, she said, "That's good. I like you always to be in the first bunch of mummies." And that was because she knew I was a little bit different, because a lot of the mummies in the school, in our primary school, which was in a middle class area, were not actually working outside the home. So she she needed, in terms of her status in school, for me to be in the first bunch of mummies. So ever since then, whenever I arrive anywhere, I say, see, first bunch of mummies.
Oh.
But because there's so much judgment, and there
Yeah.
was so much judgment. But I don't think, I have been a feminist since the 1970s.
Mhm.
Nobody ever told me I could have it all. Nobody ever said, no feminist ever went around saying that.
Yeah.
I always think that's one of the great myths, that
Yeah.
we could have it all. You just simply had to say, look, I enjoy my job and I'm going to keep working, for people to say, oh,
Mm.
you can't have it all.
Yeah.
So I never said I could have it all. People said to me, you can't have it all,
Yes. Yeah.
which is a very different kettle of fish. So what what feminists, I think what we were saying was that it's important for women to be able to be our full selves. It's
Yes.
important for men to take on their responsibilities as parents. It is important for us all as human beings. In fact, it's our responsibility and our respect for ourselves. It's the one thing we really have, is to live the best lives that we can. And by best, I mean morally best and socially best, and in every way, most, the most fulfilling lives
Mm.
that are available to us. And they're not
Yeah.
equally available to everybody, which is really very sad. And by the way, I always think that when you can't have it all, or, saying you can't have it all, women have been out in the workforce since the world started,
Yeah.
because it was only ever middle class women like me who would have had that choice of staying at home. In fact, I don't think we could have afforded it. But you know, so working women have been out there as working women forever, and have been ignored as working women,
Yeah.
have been dismissed as working women. So they have been devalued as mothers, because mothers are devalued, and devalued as workers, because they're mothers. They're
Mm.
not
Because they're
seen as
mothers.
workers, because they're workers. They're not seen as mothers. So it is a complete, the cards are absolutely stacked against women, and
Yeah.
certainly were back in the 1970s. I mean, people were horror struck that you'd actually have a job, middle class people, without looking around them and saying that the person who was maybe coming in to clean their house, or who was um, off serving them in the local shop, or who was the nurse in the hospital, or who was teaching their kids in school, or who was doing all of the myriad things that women do, that this woman very likely, very probably, had kids, and she
Yeah.
was working, and she was okay. She was maybe exhausted, but she was there, she was functioning, she was getting on with it as best she could.
Yeah.
And that is still the situation. So I always thought that um, oh, women were told they could have it all. That was a myth. It was certainly not something
Yeah.
which was put about by
Yeah.
feminists that I
Yeah.
knew, or that
Mm.
the feminist I was. I knew, along with all of my contemporaries, that it was actually bloody difficult. It was difficult, because the the world of work was not organized to incorporate you as a
Yes.
person with children, because
That's
men
it.
were in there childless. By definition, any man in the workforce was and still is actually childless. They
Yeah.
just don't have children. Or if they do, they're off stage. They're never
Yeah.
seen. They're seen and not heard. They're being looked after by women.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
women would then come into the workforce and saying, actually, we're not all at home looking after kids.
Yeah.
And that was seen as kind of a takeover bid by men who didn't like it at all, and who still don't like it, actually, in many ways, and who said, oh, well, you can't have it all. Get thee back to your thing. In
Yeah.
fact, that marriage ban, I was caught by that. I was married only very briefly, but my employer, UCD, told me I would have to leave my full-time lecturing job, or else go part-time. And I said, I'm not doing that. And I stamped my foot. That
Yeah.
was in 1973. And just very shortly after I got married, actually, the case was heard and won, that married women could actually, look, could remain in state employment, because it
Yeah.
only applied to state
State,
employment.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's sort of very interesting. It didn't apply to nurses either, by the way. But there were all kinds of things, primary school teachers, but there were all kinds of things around that were very interesting. But and I do think that thinking has actually changed a great deal, but it hasn't completely changed, because women are still having, by a long shot, women are still having to fit ourselves into a workforce and a
Yeah.
workplace, whatever it is, which is made in the image of men. It's made to suit men's lives. And men are, by definition, they don't have gender and they don't have children.
Yeah. So that's our work
So,
going forward.
well, I was going to say, if anybody listening remembers anything from our lovely conversation, men don't have kids. When they're workers, they don't have children. And they don't
Yeah.
have gender. They just are people. They are the default model for people. And we have been really fighting that for so long. But, I really love that sense of thinking, and I have been thinking about it since we spoke, of, recognizing that I often found being a mother when my daughter was young, but, was really difficult. Her dad didn't live with us. He
Yeah.
lived somewhere else, not in Dublin. It was pretty hard going, but it was also in many ways, and there were difficult times and challenging times and so on. But when I look back at that period of my life, I think it was actually a happy time overall. There were no disasters. There were no catastrophes. I'm glad to say that we were all healthy, relatively, all healthy.
Mhm.
So that was good. But it was a happy time because I think there is a great delight in being with children, which I
Mhm.
now understand from being with my grandchildren, which is in a way an even greater delight. They don't live here in Ireland, but I see them regularly. It's an even greater delight because actually you don't have to do any of the hard stuff at all. But there is something so delightful about children when they're when they're being reasonably well behaved. You learn so much about the world
Yeah.
somehow. And also, you know what you're for.
Yes.
You know what your purpose in life is.
Yeah.
Your purpose in life, as far as you can make it, is to ensure that these little ones grow up safely, as to the best of your ability. And that's that's a lovely thing, which I didn't appreciate that. I mean, there were many times when I tore my hair out and looked enviously at people who didn't have children, whose children were grown up, who, and thinking, oh my God, will she never grow up? Which I would never say for now, of course, But there were those times, and it's
Yeah.
okay. It's also all right to say that we're human
Yeah.
beings. It's okay to get totally fed up and to say, I need at least one day, preferably a week off from this business. But when I look back now, and I'm happy in my life now, I mean, it's not that I'm unhappy, but I think they were happy years,
Yeah.
not always every day, but
No.
overall they were. And that was because I was doing something which, in retrospect, I think, okay, I did not do all the right things as a mother. I could have done a lot better. But I did the best I could.
Yeah. That's it.
Really did the best I could. And that was fine,
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these conversations, please like, follow and share the podcast so others can benefit too. My name is Ciara and I'm a life coach who supports women to thrive personally and professionally. I offer one-to-one coaching sessions or monthly coaching memberships through the Women's Collective by BU Coaching, and you can find the details attached to this podcast.